When Jessica Martinez saw the crayon drawing that 6-year-old Sophia Chen had carefully placed on her desk that Tuesday morning, her coffee cup slipped from her trembling hands, shattering against the classroom floor. The image before her was so disturbing that she immediately locked her classroom door and called the principal, her voice barely above a whisper as she described what no kindergarten teacher should ever have to see. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn morning sunlight streamed through the large windows of Room 12 at Maplewood Elementary School in Cedar Valley, Oregon, casting a warm glow across the colorful alphabet posters and student artwork that decorated every available wall, space. Jessica Martinez arrived at her classroom 30 minutes before the first bell, just as she had every morning for the past 5 years. At 29, she possessed that rare combination of youthful energy and seasoned wisdom that made her one of the most beloved teachers in the school. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore a cheerful yellow cardigan that matched her optimistic outlook on life and teaching. The familiar routine of preparing for another day with her 18 kindergarten students brought Jessica a sense of peace and purpose. She arranged the art supplies at each small table, ensuring that every child would have access to the full spectrum of crayons, markers, and construction paper that would fuel their creative expression. Art time was Jessica's favorite part of the day, not just because it allowed the children to explore their imagination, but because their drawings often revealed insights into their young minds that words couldn't capture. Having recently completed her certification in child psychology with a focus on art therapy, Jessica had learned to read the subtle messages that children unconsciously embedded in their artwork. As the morning progressed and her students began filing into the classroom with their backpacks and lunchboxes, Jessica noticed that Sophia Chen seemed quieter than usual. The petite 6-year-old with silky black hair and expressive brown eyes had always been one of the more reserved children in the class, but today there was something different about her demeanor. Sophia's usual shy smile was absent, replaced by a distant look that seemed far too mature for someone who had only recently lost her first tooth. She moved through the morning routines mechanically, hanging up her purple backpack and taking her seat at the blue table near the window where the morning light illuminated her workspace. During circle time, when Jessica gathered all the children on the colorful carpet to discuss the day's activities, Sophia sat slightly apart from the group, her small hands folded in her lap as she stared at a spot on the floor. The other children chattered excitedly about their weekend adventures and family activities, but Sophia remained silent, only nodding when directly addressed. Jessica made a mental note to check in with her later, though nothing in her 5 years of teaching experience had prepared her for what was about to unfold. The transition to art time brought the usual burst of enthusiasm from most of the class. Today's assignment was simple and open-ended, designed to encourage creativity and self-expression. Jessica had asked each child to draw a picture of their family doing something they enjoyed together. The responses were typically delightful, filled with stick figures holding hands, families at the beach or park, and houses with crooked chimneys surrounded by flowers and smiling suns. Tommy Rodriguez drew his family at a baseball game, complete with hot dogs and stadium lights. Emma Washington depicted her grandmother teaching her to bake cookies, with flour scattered across a kitchen table. These innocent glimpses into their home lives never failed to warm Jessica's heart. As the children worked diligently at their tables, the classroom filled with the soft scratching of crayons against paper and the gentle murmur of creative concentration. Jessica moved between the tables, offering encouragement and asking questions about their artwork. She paused at Sophia's table, expecting to see another sweet family portrait, but what she discovered made her breath catch in her throat. Drawing was unlike anything she had ever seen from a 6-year-old child, and the implications of what it might represent sent a chill through her entire body. Sophia's artwork depicted a house, but not the typical cheerful dwelling that children usually drew. This house was rendered in dark colors, with windows that looked like empty, staring eyes. In the foreground, there were 3 figures, clearly meant to represent family members based on their relative sizes. The largest figure stood over a smaller one, and there were dark red marks scattered around the scene that Sophia had carefully colored in with a red crayon. Most disturbing of all were the words that Sophia had painstakingly written at the bottom of the page in her careful kindergarten handwriting. The message was so troubling that Jessica had to read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding. The other children continued working on their cheerful family scenes, completely unaware of the gravity of what their classmate had created. Jessica forced herself to maintain her composure, but her hands were shaking as she knelt down beside Sophia's desk. The little girl looked up at her with those same expressive brown eyes, but now Jessica could see something in them that she had missed before, a sadness and fear that no child should ever have to carry. Speaking in the gentlest voice she could manage, Jessica asked Sophia to tell her about her drawing. The child's response was delivered in such a matter-of-fact tone that it made the content even more heartbreaking. Sophia explained the scene, as if she were describing the most normal thing in the world, pointing to different elements of her artwork and providing details that made Jessica's stomach turn. The casual way that Sophia discussed what appeared to be violence and fear in her home environment suggested that these experiences had become normalized for her, which was perhaps the most troubling aspect of the entire situation. Jessica's training in child psychology had taught her to recognize the signs of trauma in children's artwork, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different from studying it in textbooks. The dark colors, the positioning of the figures, the violent imagery, and most importantly, the child's calm acceptance of these disturbing elements all pointed to a home environment that was far from safe. Every instinct Jessica possessed as both a teacher and a human being told her that Sophia was trying to communicate something critically important through her art, something that she might not have the words or courage to express directly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rest of the art period passed in a blur as Jessica struggled to process what she had witnessed while maintaining the normal classroom routine. She made copies of Sophia's drawing, carefully documenting the date and time, and began formulating a plan for how to address this situation appropriately. Her mind raced through the mandatory reporting protocols that all teachers were required to follow. But she also knew that she needed to gather more information before taking any official action that might have serious consequences for Sophia and her family. When the school day ended and the buses had departed with their precious cargo of children, Jessica remained in her empty classroom, staring at Sophia's drawing spread out on her desk. The afternoon sunlight that had seemed so cheerful that morning now cast long shadows across the room, creating an atmosphere that matched Jessica's troubled state of mind. She knew that she was at a crossroads, facing a decision that could potentially save a child's life, or alternatively, could disrupt a family based on a misunderstanding of a 6-year-old's artistic expression. The weight of responsibility felt enormous as Jessica considered her next steps. In her 5 years of teaching, she had encountered children from difficult home situations before, but nothing had prepared her for the stark, visceral impact of seeing potential abuse depicted so clearly in a child's innocent artwork. The image would be burned into her memory forever, a reminder of the trust that children place in their teachers and the obligation that educators have to protect the most vulnerable members of society. As the custodial staff began their evening cleaning routines in the hallway outside her classroom, Jessica finally gathered the courage to reach for her phone. The first call she needed to make was to Principal Williams, who would need to be informed immediately about the situation. The second call would be to Dr. Amanda Foster, the school counselor, whose expertise in child trauma would be invaluable in determining the appropriate course of action. Each phone call would set in motion a series of events that could change Sophia's life forever. And Jessica felt the enormous weight of that responsibility as she prepared to take the first step in what would become a journey that would test every aspect of her character and commitment to protecting children. The empty classroom around her, with its cheerful decorations and evidence of childhood learning and growth, seemed to mock the dark reality that one of her students was potentially facing at home. Jessica understood that the next 24 hours would be crucial in determining Sophia's future, and she was determined to do everything in her power to ensure that the little girl would be safe, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable truths and challenging powerful adults who might prefer to look the other way. Outside the classroom windows, the Oregon autumn was painting the landscape in brilliant colors, a beautiful reminder that change, even difficult change, could lead to something better. Jessica drew strength from that thought as she prepared to make the phone calls that would transform her from a kindergarten teacher into an advocate for a child who desperately needed someone to believe in the truth that she had expressed through her heartbreaking artwork. The following morning brought an unexpected twist that would shatter any remaining doubt about the seriousness of Sophia's situation. Jessica arrived at school earlier than usual, her mind still processing the events of the previous day and the difficult conversations she had shared with Principal Williams and Dr. Foster. The hallways of Maplewood Elementary were eerily quiet in the pre-dawn hours, with only the gentle hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of the custodial crew finishing their overnight cleaning routines. As Jessica unlocked her classroom door and stepped inside, she immediately noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. There, placed carefully on her desk in the exact center where she couldn't possibly miss it, was another drawing. The paper was slightly crumpled, as if it had been clutched tightly in small hands, and the edges showed signs of having been folded and unfolded multiple times. Jessica approached her desk with a mixture of anticipation and dread, knowing instinctively that whatever Sophia had created during the night would be even more revealing than her previous artwork. The second drawing was more detailed and significantly more disturbing than the first. This time, Sophia had used multiple sheets of paper, taping them together to create a larger canvas for her expression. The scene depicted what appeared to be the interior of a house, with different rooms visible as if the walls had been removed to show a cross-section view. In each room, there were figures engaged in various activities, but the overall tone of the artwork was overwhelmingly dark and threatening. In what appeared to be a living room, a large figure sat in a chair, while a smaller figure cowered nearby. Dark scribbles surrounded both characters, and Sophia had pressed so hard with her black crayon that she had torn through the paper in several places. The kitchen area showed broken objects scattered across the floor, rendered in jagged lines that conveyed violence and chaos. Most heart-wrenching of all was the bedroom scene, where a tiny figure lay curled up under what appeared to be a bed, surrounded by words that Sophia had written in her careful kindergarten handwriting. The text scattered throughout the drawing was more extensive than in her previous artwork, and the messages were increasingly specific and concerning. Sophia had written phrases that no 6-year-old should know, descriptions of sounds and situations that spoke to a level of trauma that went far beyond what Jessica had initially suspected. The clinical detachment with which these disturbing elements were presented suggested that Sophia was documenting experiences rather than imagining scenarios, a distinction that filled Jessica with both rage and determination. What made this second drawing even more significant was the way it had been delivered. The fact that Sophia had somehow gained access to the classroom after hours, or had convinced someone to help her place the drawing on Jessica's desk, indicated a level of desperation and trust that was both touching and terrifying. The child was clearly trying to communicate something urgent, using the only medium through which she felt safe expressing her reality. Jessica carefully photographed the artwork from multiple angles, ensuring that every detail was captured with crystal clarity. Her hands trembled slightly as she handled the paper, knowing that she was holding evidence of what might be ongoing abuse of a vulnerable child. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever as she considered the implications of what Sophia was trying to tell her through these increasingly desperate artistic cries for help. The classroom door opened quietly, and Dr. Amanda Foster stepped inside, her expression immediately shifting to concern as she observed Jessica's pale complexion and the artwork spread across the desk. The school counselor had arrived early specifically to discuss Sophia's case, but neither woman had expected to discover new evidence that would escalate the urgency of their intervention. Dr. Foster examined the second drawing with the trained eye of someone who had spent 15 years working with traumatized children. Her assessment was swift and decisive, confirming Jessica's worst fears about the situation. The progression from the first drawing to the second showed an escalation, in both detail and desperation, that suggested Sophia's home environment was becoming increasingly dangerous. Together, the two educators spent the next hour carefully documenting every aspect of Sophia's artwork, creating a comprehensive record that would be crucial for any official investigation. They discussed the psychological implications of the imagery, the significance of the specific words and phrases that Sophia had included, and the urgent need for immediate intervention to ensure the child's safety. As other staff members began arriving for the school day, Jessica and Dr. Foster moved their discussion to the counselor's office, where they could speak more privately about the delicate situation they were facing. The decision to involve Child Protective Services was no longer a question of if, but rather a matter of how quickly they could initiate the process while ensuring Sophia's continued safety at school. The arrival of students for the regular school day created an additional layer of complexity to the situation. Jessica needed to maintain her normal classroom routine while simultaneously coordinating with various officials and agencies to address Sophia's case. The challenge of appearing calm and supportive while internally grappling with the knowledge of what one of her students was enduring required every ounce of her professional training and personal strength. When Sophia arrived that morning, she appeared even more withdrawn than the previous day. Her small frame seemed to have shrunk overnight, and she moved through the classroom like a ghost, barely acknowledging her classmates or participating in the usual morning activities. The dark circles under her eyes suggested that sleep had been elusive, and Jessica noticed that the child flinched whenever there were sudden noises or movements nearby. During the morning circle time, Sophia positioned herself in the back of the group, as far from Jessica as possible while still technically participating in the classroom community. This withdrawal was particularly significant because it represented a dramatic change from her previous behavior, when she had always sought the comfort and security of being close to trusted adults. The other children in the class began to notice Sophia's unusual behavior, with several of them asking Jessica if their classmate was feeling sick or sad. These innocent inquiries from her peers only served to highlight how dramatically Sophia's demeanor had changed, providing additional evidence that something significant was happening in her life outside of school. As the morning progressed, Jessica found herself constantly aware of Sophia's presence in the classroom, monitoring her emotional state and looking for opportunities to provide support without overwhelming the fragile child. The delicate balance between offering comfort and respecting Sophia's obvious need for space required constant adjustment and sensitivity. The second drawing had changed everything, transforming what might have been dismissed as childhood imagination into undeniable evidence of a child in crisis. Jessica knew that there would be no turning back from this point, and that the next steps she took would have profound consequences for Sophia's future safety and well-being. Part 3. The recognition. The magnitude of what Jessica was witnessing became fully clear during the lunch period when she observed Sophia's behavior in the cafeteria. While other children chatted excitedly about their morning activities and traded items from their lunchboxes, Sophia sat alone at the end of a table, methodically eating her sandwich without any apparent enjoyment or awareness of her surroundings. Her movements were mechanical and careful, as if she had learned to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. What struck Jessica most profoundly was the way Sophia reacted to the normal sounds and chaos of a school cafeteria. When a chair scraped against the floor or a child laughed loudly, Sophia would immediately tense up, her shoulders rising toward her ears in a defensive posture that spoke to a state of constant hypervigilance. These were not the normal startled responses of a healthy 6-year-old, but rather the conditioned reactions of someone who had learned to anticipate danger in everyday situations. Jessica positioned herself strategically in the cafeteria where she could observe Sophia without being obvious about her surveillance. The clinical part of her mind cataloged every behavior and reaction, building a comprehensive picture of a child who was clearly struggling with trauma. The maternal part of her heart ached for this little girl who had learned to navigate the world with such caution and fear. When another student accidentally knocked over a milk carton, creating a loud crash that echoed through the cafeteria, Sophia's reaction was immediate and telling. She dropped to the floor under the table, covering her head with her small hands, in a protective gesture that suggested she had experienced situations where such defensive positioning had been necessary for her safety. The other children barely noticed the minor accident, but for Sophia, it had triggered a response that revealed the depth of her trauma. Jessica quickly moved to Sophia's side, kneeling down beside the table where the child remained curled in, a protective ball. Speaking in the softest, most reassuring voice she could manage, Jessica gently explained that everything was safe and that the noise had just been an accident. It took several minutes of patient coaxing before Sophia was willing to emerge from her hiding place, and even then, she remained visibly shaken for the rest of the lunch period. The incident in the cafeteria provided Jessica with crucial insight into the scope of Sophia's trauma. This was not a child who was simply dealing with typical family stress or adjustment issues related to starting school. The behaviors she was exhibiting were consistent with someone who had experienced significant and ongoing abuse, someone whose nervous system had been conditioned to expect danger at any moment. After lunch, Jessica made the decision to create a quiet space in her classroom where Sophia could retreat if she felt overwhelmed. Using colorful cushions and soft blankets, she arranged a cozy corner behind the classroom library where a child could sit peacefully without being observed by classmates. This safe space became Sophia's refuge throughout the afternoon, a place where she could regulate her emotions and feel protected from the overwhelming stimuli of the classroom environment. The afternoon brought another revelation when Jessica noticed that Sophia had been drawing during quiet reading time. Unlike her previous artwork, this drawing was created spontaneously during unstructured time, suggesting that the artistic expression was serving as a crucial emotional outlet for the traumatized child. Jessica observed from a distance as Sophia worked with intense concentration, her small hand moving deliberately across the paper as she created another window into her troubled world. This third drawing was different from the previous two in several significant ways. While still disturbing in content, it showed signs of hope and resilience that had been absent from her earlier work. There were still dark elements and concerning imagery, but Sophia had also included representations of safety and protection. A small figure that clearly represented herself was shown hiding in what appeared to be a school setting, surrounded by caring adults who formed a protective barrier against threatening forces. The inclusion of school as a safe space in Sophia's artwork was both heartening and heartbreaking. It suggested that the child recognized Maplewood Elementary as a refuge from whatever dangers she faced at home, but it also highlighted the stark contrast between her experiences in different environments. The fact that she could envision safety and protection meant that her spirit had not been completely broken by her traumatic experiences. Jessica's recognition of the patterns in Sophia's behavior and artwork led to a profound understanding of her responsibility as both an educator and a caring adult. This was not a situation that would resolve itself or improve with time and patience. Sophia was actively seeking help through the only means available to her, using her artistic ability to communicate truths that she was either unable or afraid to express verbally. The clinical training that Jessica had received in child psychology provided her with the framework to understand what she was observing, but the emotional impact of witnessing a child suffering was something that no amount of education could have prepared her for. The knowledge that Sophia trusted her enough to share these deeply personal and traumatic experiences through her artwork was both an honor and a tremendous responsibility. As the school day drew to a close, Jessica made several important decisions about how to proceed with Sophia's case. The evidence was mounting with each passing hour, and the child's behavior was becoming increasingly concerning. The time for cautious observation had passed, and decisive action was now required to ensure Sophia's safety and well-being. The transformation in Jessica's understanding of the situation was complete. What had begun as concern about a single, disturbing drawing had evolved into the recognition of an ongoing crisis that required immediate and comprehensive intervention. Sophia Chen was a child in desperate need of protection, and Jessica Martinez was determined to be the advocate who would ensure that help arrived before it was too late. Saunter Part 4. The Investigation. The decision to delve deeper into Sophia's background required Jessica to navigate the complex world of school records, family information, and community resources with the precision of a detective and the heart of a guardian angel. Her first stop was the main office, where she requested access to Sophia's enrollment file, with the careful explanation that she needed to better understand the child's educational needs and family structure to provide appropriate support. Principal Williams, a man in his mid-50s with graying temples and a reputation for putting student welfare above all other considerations, granted Jessica's request without hesitation. He had been equally disturbed by the evidence that Jessica and Dr. Foster had presented, and he understood that gathering comprehensive information about Sophia's situation was crucial for determining the most appropriate course of action. Sophia's file revealed several concerning details that had not been apparent during her initial enrollment. The family had moved to Cedar Valley just 3 months earlier, relocating from a town nearly 200 miles away under circumstances that were not clearly documented. The emergency contact information listed only Sophia's mother, Lisa Chen, with no mention of extended family members or close friends who might serve as additional support systems. Most significantly, the file contained a note from Sophia's previous school indicating that there had been concerns about her attendance and academic performance during the final months before her family's relocation. The previous teacher had documented several instances when Sophia had arrived at school with unexplained injuries, though no formal reports had been filed with Child Protective Services. This pattern of concern from educational professionals suggested that Sophia's current situation was not a recent development, but rather an ongoing issue that had followed the family to their new community. Jessica's investigation led her to examine the family's address and neighborhood more closely. The Chen family lived on Willow Creek Drive, a quiet residential street lined with modest 2-story homes that typically housed young families and retirees. The neighborhood was considered safe and family-friendly, with well-maintained yards and sidewalks where children could be seen riding bicycles and playing after school. This seemingly normal environment made the reality of what Sophia might be experiencing at home even more disturbing and difficult to reconcile. A conversation with the school nurse provided additional pieces to the puzzle that was Sophia's life. Mrs. Patterson, who had been working at Maplewood Elementary for over a decade, mentioned that Sophia had visited the nurse's office several times since starting school, always complaining of stomach aches or headaches that had no apparent physical cause. These psychosomatic symptoms were consistent with the stress responses that traumatized children often exhibited, providing further evidence that Sophia was struggling with significant emotional distress. The nurse also revealed that during one of these visits, Sophia had asked if there were any places where children could go if they didn't feel safe at home. This innocent yet heartbreaking question had stayed with Mrs. Patterson, who had provided general information about trusted adults and safety resources while carefully documenting the interaction in case future action became necessary. Jessica's research extended to examining Sophia's academic performance and social interactions within the classroom environment. A review of her work samples and assessment scores revealed a child with above-average intelligence who was capable of grade-level performance when she felt secure and supported. However, Her work showed significant inconsistency, with periods of excellent achievement followed by days when she seemed unable to focus or complete even simple tasks. The social dynamics within the classroom provided additional insights into Sophia's emotional state. While she was not overtly disruptive or problematic, she had not formed any close friendships with her classmates. Other children in the class had begun to notice her withdrawn behavior, with several students expressing concern to Jessica about why Sophia always seemed sad or scared. One particularly observant classmate, a precocious 6-year-old named Marcus, had approached Jessica privately to share his worry about Sophia. In the straightforward manner that only children possessed, Marcus explained that Sophia never wanted to talk about her family or her home, and that she always seemed frightened when it was time to go home at the end of the school day. These observations from a peer provided valuable confirmation of the patterns that Jessica had been documenting in her professional capacity. Jessica's investigation also included research into the resources available within the Cedar Valley community for families in crisis. She discovered that the town had a well-established network of social services, including a family crisis center, counseling services specifically designed for children, and a strong relationship with the county's Child Protective Services Department. This knowledge was reassuring, as it meant that if intervention became necessary, there would be appropriate support systems available to help Sophia and her family. The most challenging aspect of Jessica's investigation was gathering information about David Chen, Sophia's father, without raising suspicions or violating privacy boundaries. Public records searches revealed limited information about his employment history and background, but there were no obvious red flags that would have predicted the concerning behaviors that Sophia's artwork seemed to be documenting. What Jessica did discover was that the family had moved frequently over the past several years, living in at least 4 different communities since Sophia's birth. This pattern of relocation could be interpreted in various ways, but combined with the other evidence, it suggested a possible pattern of the family leaving communities when questions about Sophia's welfare began to arise. A careful review of local newspaper archives and community social media groups from their previous towns revealed several disturbing patterns. In each location where the Chen family had lived, there had been reports of domestic disturbances at their address, though none had resulted in arrests or formal charges. This information painted a picture of a family struggling with ongoing issues that had escalated to the point where neighbors had felt compelled to involve law enforcement. The investigation phase of Jessica's response to Sophia's situation provided crucial context for understanding the scope and history of the problems that the child was facing. It became clear that this was not an isolated incident or a recent development, but rather a long-standing pattern of dysfunction that had been following Sophia throughout her young life. The evidence suggested that the family's recent move to Cedar Valley might have been motivated by a desire to escape scrutiny in their previous community rather than by employment or other positive opportunities. Armed with this comprehensive understanding of Sophia's background and family history, Jessica felt more confident about the necessity of taking decisive action to protect the vulnerable child. The investigation had confirmed her worst fears, while also providing the documentation that would be necessary to convince authorities to take the situation seriously and intervene appropriately. Part 5. The consultation. The gravity of Sophia's situation demanded expertise beyond what Jessica could provide alone, leading her to reach out to Dr. Amanda Foster for a comprehensive consultation that would determine the most appropriate course of action. Dr. Foster's office, located in the counseling wing of Maplewood Elementary, was designed to be welcoming and non-threatening to children, with soft lighting, comfortable seating, and walls decorated with calming artwork that created an atmosphere of safety and trust. Dr. Foster had spent 15 years specializing in childhood trauma and family crisis intervention, making her uniquely qualified to assess the complex situation that Sophia presented. Her experience included work with law enforcement agencies, child protective services, and family courts, giving her a comprehensive understanding of the systems and processes that would need to be navigated to ensure Sophia's protection. The consultation began with a thorough review of all the evidence that Jessica had gathered, including the 3 drawings, her behavioral observations, and the background information from Sophia's school records. Dr. Foster examined each piece of artwork with the trained eye of someone who understood the psychological significance of children's artistic expression, pointing out details and patterns that provided crucial insights into Sophia's emotional state and traumatic experiences. According to Dr. Foster's professional assessment, Sophia's drawings exhibited several classic indicators of childhood trauma and abuse. The use of dark colors, the positioning of figures in threatening relationships, and the specific imagery of violence and fear all pointed to experiences that went far beyond normal childhood stress or adjustment difficulties. Most significantly, the progression of the drawings showed an escalation in both detail and desperation that suggested the child's situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. The consultation expanded to include an examination of Sophia's behavioral patterns and symptoms within the school environment. Dr. Foster helped Jessica understand that the hypervigilance, withdrawal, and psychosomatic complaints that Sophia exhibited were classic presentations of complex trauma in young children. These behaviors represented adaptive responses to chronic stress and danger, indicating that Sophia's nervous system had been conditioned to expect threat and violence as normal aspects of daily life. Dr. Foster's expertise also extended to understanding the family dynamics that might be contributing to Sophia's situation. Based on the evidence available, she identified several concerning patterns that suggested a household characterized by domestic violence, with Sophia potentially serving as both a witness to and victim of ongoing abuse. The isolation from extended family and frequent relocations that Jessica had discovered during her investigation were consistent with patterns often seen in families where abuse was present. One of the most valuable aspects of the consultation was Dr. Foster's guidance regarding the legal and ethical obligations that Jessica faced as a mandated reporter. While the evidence clearly indicated that a report to Child Protective Services was necessary, Dr. Foster helped Jessica understand the process and potential outcomes of such a report, including the importance of thorough documentation and the need to prepare for various scenarios that might unfold once official intervention began. The consultation also addressed the immediate safety concerns for Sophia, while the reporting and investigation process was initiated. Dr. Foster and Jessica developed a comprehensive safety plan that would ensure Sophia's protection during school hours while also providing her with additional emotional support and resources. This plan included strategies for monitoring Sophia's emotional state, providing her with safe spaces to retreat when overwhelmed, and maintaining open communication channels that would allow her to seek help if her situation at home deteriorated. Further, Dr. Foster's experience with similar cases provided valuable insights into the potential challenges and complications that might arise during the intervention process. She explained that families in crisis often responded to outside intervention with increased secrecy and control, which could potentially put Sophia at greater risk in the short term. This knowledge emphasized the importance of swift and decisive action once the formal reporting process began. The consultation included a discussion of the resources and support services that would be available to Sophia and her family throughout the intervention process. Cedar Valley's network of social services included specialized programs for traumatized children, family counseling services, and emergency placement options if removal from the home became necessary. Understanding these resources helped Jessica feel more confident that appropriate support would be available regardless of how the situation evolved. Dr. Foster also provided guidance regarding the emotional toll that this case was likely to take on Jessica personally. Working with traumatized children and confronting evidence of abuse could be deeply affecting for educators, and Dr. Foster emphasized the importance of seeking support and maintaining professional boundaries while advocating for Sophia's welfare. This aspect of the consultation helped Jessica understand that taking care of herself was crucial for her ability to continue supporting Sophia effectively. The consultation concluded with the development of a detailed action plan that outlined the specific steps that needed to be taken to ensure Sophia's safety and begin the process of addressing her traumatic experiences. This plan included timelines for reporting, strategies for ongoing monitoring and support, and protocols for responding to various scenarios that might develop as the case progressed. Perhaps most importantly, the consultation reinforced Jessica's understanding that her instincts and observations had been accurate, and that her decision to investigate and seek expert guidance had been appropriate and necessary. Dr. Foster's validation of Jessica's concerns provided the confidence and professional support that would be crucial for navigating the challenging process ahead. The consultation with Dr. Foster transformed Jessica's approach from reactive concern to proactive advocacy, providing her with the knowledge, resources, and professional support necessary to become an effective champion for Sophia's welfare. Armed with expert guidance and a comprehensive understanding of the systems and processes involved in child protection, Jessica was prepared to take the decisive actions that would determine Sophia's future safety and well-being. The breakthrough in understanding Sophia's situation came when Jessica decided to contact educators from the child's previous schools, a decision that would reveal a disturbing pattern of behavior that had been following the Chen family across multiple communities. Armed with the contact information from Sophia's transfer records, Jessica began making carefully worded phone calls to teachers and administrators who had worked with Sophia during her brief tenures at various elementary schools throughout Oregon and Northern California. The first conversation was with Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, a second-grade teacher at Pine Grove Elementary in Medford, Oregon, where Sophia had attended school for barely 4 months before her family's sudden departure. Mrs. Rodriguez remembered Sophia vividly, describing her as a bright but increasingly troubled child who had exhibited many of the same concerning behaviors that Jessica had been observing. The similarities were striking and deeply troubling, painting a picture of a child whose trauma had been accumulating over years rather than months. Mrs. Rodriguez shared that Sophia's artistic expressions at Pine Grove had been equally disturbing. Though at the time, the school had not taken decisive action due to concerns about cultural sensitivity and the lack of concrete evidence. The family had been relatively new to the community, and there had been reluctance to immediately involve Child Protective Services without more substantial proof of abuse. This hesitation had ultimately allowed the Chen family to relocate before any formal intervention could take place. The conversation revealed that Sophia's father, David Chen, had been employed as a night security guard at a local warehouse during their time in Medford. His work schedule had meant that he was home during the day while Sophia was at school, and several neighbors had reported hearing loud arguments and what sounded like physical altercations coming from the Chen residence during daylight hours. However, when police had conducted welfare checks, the family had always presented a calm and cooperative front, with no visible evidence of violence or abuse. Mrs. Rodriguez also mentioned that Sophia's mother, Lisa Chen, had seemed increasingly isolated and fearful during parent-teacher conferences and school events. She had appeared to defer completely to her husband's decisions and had never participated in school activities without his direct supervision. This pattern of control and isolation was consistent with what experts recognized as classic signs of domestic violence, suggesting that Lisa herself might be a victim who was unable to protect her daughter. The second conversation was with Mr. James Patterson, a kindergarten teacher at Riverside Elementary in Sacramento, California, where the Chen family had lived for approximately 6 months 2 years earlier. Mr. Patterson's account was even more disturbing than the previous teacher's report, as he described a situation where Sophia had exhibited severe behavioral regression and had created artwork that was so concerning that the school had initiated the process of contacting Child Protective Services. According to Mr. Patterson, Sophia had begun having episodes during school hours where she would become completely non-responsive, staring blankly into space for minutes at a time before suddenly becoming agitated and seeking hiding places within the classroom. These dissociative episodes were classic symptoms of severe trauma in young children, indicating that Sophia's psychological state had been deteriorating even at that early age. The most shocking revelation from Mr. Patterson was that the family had disappeared from Sacramento literally overnight, leaving no forwarding address and abandoning a lease on their rental home. This sudden departure had occurred just days before a scheduled home visit from Child Protective Services, suggesting that the family had been aware of the impending investigation and had fled to avoid scrutiny. The pattern of disappearing when official intervention seemed imminent was emerging as a consistent theme in the Chen family's history. Mr. Patterson had kept copies of some of Sophia's most concerning artwork from her time at Riverside Elementary, and he offered to scan and email them to Jessica for comparison with the current drawings. When these images arrived in Jessica's inbox that evening, the similarities were both unmistakable and heartbreaking. The themes, imagery, and emotional content were virtually identical to what Sophia was producing at Maplewood Elementary, confirming that her traumatic experiences had been ongoing for years. The third conversation was with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a school psychologist who had worked with Sophia during a brief enrollment at Valley View Elementary in Redding, California, approximately 3 years earlier. Dr. Mitchell's professional assessment had been that Sophia was exhibiting signs of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, a diagnosis that was rarely seen in children so young unless they had experienced severe and prolonged abuse. Dr. Mitchell explained that complex PTSD in children typically resulted from ongoing exposure to violence, emotional abuse, and psychological manipulation within the family environment. The symptoms included hypervigilance, emotional dysregulation, difficulty forming attachments, and a persistent sense of threat that interfered with normal childhood development. Sophia's case had been particularly concerning because she had exhibited all of these symptoms at the age of only 4 years old. The conversation with Dr. Mitchell also revealed that there had been an incident at Valley View Elementary where Sophia had disclosed to a teacher that her father played scary games with her that made her feel bad, but when questioned further, she had immediately retracted her statements and claimed that she had been making up stories. This pattern of disclosure followed by retraction was common in abused children who had been threatened with consequences for revealing family secrets. Dr. Mitchell had recommended intensive therapeutic intervention for Sophia, along with a comprehensive investigation into the family's home environment. However, before these recommendations could be implemented, the Chen family had once again relocated suddenly, this time citing David Chen's new employment opportunity as the reason for their departure. The timing of their move, coming just days after Sophia's concerning disclosure, suggested that the family was operating according to a pattern of fleeing whenever their situation began to attract official attention. The fourth and most disturbing conversation was with Mrs. Angela Thompson, a first-grade teacher at Mountain View Elementary in Eureka, California, where the Chen family had lived during Sophia's earliest school experience. Mrs. Thompson described a family that had initially seemed normal and engaged, but had gradually revealed concerning dynamics as the school year progressed. Mrs. Thompson recalled that David Chen had been unusually controlling about Sophia's school activities, insisting on detailed reports about her daily behavior and academic performance. He had also been resistant to allowing Sophia to participate in normal childhood activities, like playground time with classmates, claiming that she was too fragile and needed constant supervision. This level of control and isolation was not typical of healthy parent-child relationships, and suggested an environment where normal childhood autonomy was being systematically suppressed. The conversation revealed that there had been multiple incidents where Sophia had arrived at school with unexplained injuries, including bruises on her arms and legs that she claimed were from falling down stairs or running into doors. While these explanations might have been plausible in isolation, the frequency and pattern of injuries had raised concerns among the school staff. Mrs. Thompson also mentioned that Sophia had exhibited extreme food insecurity behaviors, hoarding snacks from her lunch and becoming distressed when food was not available. This behavior suggested that food might have been used as a means of control within the household, with meals being withheld as punishment or manipulation. The psychological impact of such treatment on a young child was profound and long-lasting. The pattern that emerged from these conversations was clear and deeply disturbing. The Chen family had been moving from community to community whenever Sophia's situation began to attract official attention, creating a cycle where the child's trauma continued and escalated while the family avoided accountability. Each relocation had allowed David Chen to maintain his pattern of abuse, while preventing any single school or community from gathering enough evidence to intervene effectively. The geographic scope of the family's movements was also significant, spanning multiple states and covering hundreds of miles over the course of several years. This extensive travel suggested a deliberate strategy, rather than random relocations, indicating that David Chen was sophisticated in his efforts to avoid detection and intervention. The pattern demonstrated a level of planning and manipulation that made him particularly dangerous and difficult to apprehend. Jessica's documentation of this pattern provided crucial evidence that Sophia's current situation was not an isolated incident, but rather the continuation of years of systematic abuse. The historical evidence from multiple schools and communities would be invaluable in convincing Child Protective Services and law enforcement to take immediate and decisive action to protect Sophia. The revelation of this extensive pattern also highlighted the urgent need for swift intervention before the Chen family could once again disappear and relocate to a new community where the cycle would continue. Jessica understood that she might be Sophia's last opportunity for rescue from a situation that had been escalating for years without effective intervention. Part 7. The Rising Stakes. The Wednesday morning arrival of Sophia at school marked a dramatic escalation in the urgency of her situation, as the child appeared at Jessica's classroom door with visible injuries that could no longer be explained away as accidents or childhood mishaps. The bruising on Sophia's left wrist was dark and finger-shaped, suggesting that someone had grabbed her with significant force, while a cut above her right eyebrow had been inexpertly bandaged with a piece of medical tape that was already beginning to peel away from her delicate skin. Jessica's immediate response was to gently guide Sophia to the nurse's office, where Mrs. Patterson could provide proper medical attention, while also documenting the injuries according to the school's mandatory reporting protocols. The walk down the hallway felt interminable, as Jessica struggled to maintain her composure, while internally raging at the clear evidence of physical abuse that Sophia was displaying. The child walked slowly and carefully, favoring her left side, in a way that suggested additional injuries might be hidden beneath her long-sleeved shirt and jeans. In the nurse's office, Mrs. Patterson's experienced assessment revealed the full extent of Sophia's current injuries, which included not only the visible marks on her wrist and face, but also bruising along her ribs that became apparent when her shirt was lifted to check for additional trauma. The pattern and severity of the injuries were consistent with physical abuse rather than accidental harm, providing the concrete evidence that had been lacking in previous concerns about Sophia's welfare. Mrs. Patterson's documentation was thorough and professional, including detailed photographs of each injury along with measurements and descriptions that would be crucial for any legal proceedings that might follow. The nurse's experience with similar cases allowed her to recognize the significance of what she was observing, and she immediately contacted Principal Williams to report the findings and recommend immediate involvement of Child Protective Services. While Mrs. Patterson was completing her assessment and documentation, Jessica remained with Sophia to provide emotional support and reassurance. The child had become increasingly withdrawn since arriving at school, responding to questions with single-word answers or silent nods while avoiding eye contact with the concerned adults around her. Her behavior suggested that she was terrified of the consequences that might follow from the discovery of her injuries. When asked about how she had been hurt, Sophia initially repeated the familiar refrain about falling downstairs and running into doors. But her delivery was mechanical and rehearsed in a way that made it clear she had been coached to provide these explanations. The disconnect between the severity of her injuries and the implausible explanations she offered was stark evidence of the manipulation and control that characterized her home environment. As the morning progressed, additional concerning details emerged about Sophia's condition beyond the visible physical injuries. Mrs. Patterson noticed that the child was dehydrated and appeared to have lost weight since her previous visit to the nurse's office just 2 weeks earlier. These signs suggested that the abuse might be extending to neglect of Sophia's basic needs for food, water, and proper care. The discovery of Sophia's injuries created an immediate crisis that demanded swift and decisive action from the school administration. Principal Williams initiated the emergency protocols that had been established for situations involving suspected child abuse, which included immediate notification of Child Protective Services, documentation of all evidence, and implementation of safety measures to protect the child while official investigations were conducted. The involvement of Child Protective Services meant that Sophia would not be released to her parents at the end of the school day unless and until a thorough investigation could be completed. This decision, while necessary for her protection, created additional stress for the traumatized child who was already struggling to understand and cope with her situation. Jessica and Dr. Foster worked together to explain the situation to Sophia in age-appropriate terms while providing the emotional support she desperately needed. The response from David Chen when he was contacted about the situation was both predictable and revealing. His immediate reaction was anger and defensiveness, with repeated demands to know who had made accusations against him and threats of legal action against the school for interfering in family matters. His focus on protecting himself rather than expressing concern for his injured daughter was telling and consistent with the behavioral patterns that abusive parents typically exhibited when confronted with evidence of their actions. Lisa Chen's response was markedly different from her husband's, characterized by tearful apologies and explanations that seemed designed to minimize the severity of the situation while accepting responsibility for failing to protect her daughter. Her reaction suggested that she was aware of the abuse, but felt powerless to prevent it, a common dynamic in households where domestic violence was present, and one parent was completely dominated by the other. The afternoon brought the arrival of Detective Maria Santos, a specialist in family violence cases who had been assigned to investigate Sophia's situation. Detective Santos's interview with Sophia was conducted with exceptional sensitivity and skill, using techniques specifically designed to help traumatized children feel safe enough to share their experiences. The detective's gentle but thorough questioning revealed details about Sophia's home life that confirmed the worst fears of the school staff who had been advocating for her protection. During the interview, Sophia gradually became more willing to discuss her experiences at home, describing a pattern of violence and intimidation that had escalated significantly in recent weeks. Her father's behavior had become increasingly unpredictable and violent, with episodes of rage that seemed to be triggered by minor infractions or simply by his own internal struggles with alcohol and stress. The child's account painted a picture of a household where fear and violence had become normalized to the point where Sophia had learned to accept abuse as an inevitable part of her daily existence. The interview also revealed that Sophia had been threatened with severe consequences if she ever disclosed the family's secrets to anyone outside the home. David Chen had apparently told her that if anyone discovered what happened in their house, both she and her mother would be severely punished, and that the family would be separated forever. These threats had been effective in silencing the child, until the physical evidence of abuse became too obvious to hide. Detective Santos's investigation extended beyond Sophia's immediate situation to examine the family's history and background, including their pattern of relocations and the previous reports from other communities. The accumulation of evidence from multiple sources created a comprehensive picture of systematic abuse that had been ongoing for years, providing a strong foundation for criminal charges against David Chen. The evening brought the news that David Chen had been arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse and domestic violence. The arrest had taken place at the family's home on Willow Creek Drive, where additional evidence of abuse had been discovered during the execution of a search warrant. Lisa Chen had been taken to a local hospital for treatment of injuries that she had sustained during a recent domestic violence incident. and she was receiving support from victim advocates who specialized in helping survivors of intimate partner violence. The resolution of the immediate crisis brought relief, but also uncertainty about Sophia's future placement and care. While she was no longer in immediate danger from her father, the trauma she had experienced would require extensive therapeutic intervention and ongoing support. The question of whether she could safely remain with her mother, who was also a victim of abuse, would need to be carefully evaluated by Child Protective Services and the family court system. Jessica's role in bringing Sophia's situation to light had been crucial in preventing further escalation of the abuse and possibly saving the child's life. The pattern of evidence that she had assembled, combined with her careful documentation and professional advocacy, had provided the foundation for successful intervention by law enforcement and Child Protective Services. The case demonstrated the critical importance of educators who were willing to recognize signs of abuse and take decisive action to protect vulnerable children. Researcher Part 8. The Obstacle Wall. The arrest of David Chen should have marked the end of Sophia's ordeal, but instead it revealed the complex web of bureaucratic challenges and systemic obstacles that often prevented abused children from receiving the protection and support they desperately needed. The first major hurdle emerged when the family court judge assigned to the case expressed skepticism about removing Sophia from her mother's care, despite clear evidence that Lisa Chen had been unable to protect her daughter from years of escalating abuse. The judge's reluctance stemmed from a legal preference for keeping families together whenever possible, combined with Lisa Chen's apparent cooperation with authorities and her own status as a victim of domestic violence. While these considerations were understandable from a legal perspective, they failed to account for the psychological damage that Sophia had sustained and the ongoing risk that she might face if returned to an environment where abuse had been normalized for years. The complexity of the legal proceedings was compounded by the involvement of multiple agencies and professionals, each with their own protocols, timelines, and priorities. Child Protective Services, the District Attorney's Office, victim advocacy, groups, and therapeutic service providers all had roles to play in Sophia's case, but coordinating their efforts proved challenging and time-consuming. The bureaucratic delays meant that crucial decisions about Sophia's placement and treatment were postponed, while various agencies conducted their own assessments and investigations. Jessica found herself frustrated by her limited role in the official proceedings, despite being the person who had initiated the intervention that led to Sophia's rescue. As a teacher, she was not considered a primary stakeholder in the legal process, and her intimate knowledge of Sophia's educational and emotional needs was often overlooked by officials who were focused on legal and procedural requirements rather than the child's best interests. The temporary placement of Sophia in emergency foster care created additional challenges for her emotional well-being and educational continuity. The foster family, while well-intentioned and caring, was unfamiliar with Sophia's specific needs and trauma history, leading to difficulties in helping her adjust to yet another major change in her living situation. The child's attachment to Jessica and the security she had found at Maplewood Elementary became even more crucial as she struggled to adapt to her temporary placement. The investigation into David Chen's crimes revealed that the legal system was ill-equipped to address the interstate nature of his pattern of abuse. While local authorities could prosecute him for crimes committed in Cedar Valley, the similar incidents that had occurred in other states fell under different jurisdictions, with varying levels of interest in pursuing charges. This fragmentation meant that David Chen might face consequences for only a small portion of his criminal behavior, potentially resulting in a sentence that did not reflect the full scope of his crimes. Lisa Chen's situation presented another layer of complexity that challenged the system's ability to respond effectively to domestic violence cases. While she was clearly a victim who deserved support and protection, her failure to protect Sophia over a period of years raised questions about her fitness as a parent and her ability to provide a safe environment for her daughter in the future. The competing priorities of supporting domestic violence survivors while protecting child victims created ethical and legal dilemmas that were difficult to resolve. The therapeutic resources available to address Sophia's complex trauma were limited by funding constraints and long waiting lists that meant she might not receive specialized treatment for months. The delay in accessing appropriate mental health services was particularly concerning, given the severity of her psychological injuries and the critical importance of early intervention in cases of childhood trauma. Jessica advocated tirelessly for expedited access to therapeutic services, but was repeatedly told that the system was overwhelmed and that Sophia would have to wait her turn. The media attention that the case began to attract created additional complications as reporters sought to cover the story of abuse and rescue in the small community of Cedar Valley. While public awareness of child abuse issues was important, the intrusion of media coverage threatened to further traumatize Sophia and compromise the privacy that was essential for her healing. School officials found themselves having to implement security measures to protect Sophia from unwanted attention while she attended classes at Maplewood Elementary. The financial costs associated with Sophia's care and treatment created burdens for both the foster care system and the various agencies involved in her case: emergency placements, therapeutic services, legal proceedings, and ongoing supervision all required significant resources that were already stretched thin across the child welfare system. The complexity and duration of Sophia's case meant that these costs would continue to accumulate for months or even years as she worked toward recovery. Educational continuity emerged as another significant challenge as various officials debated whether Sophia should remain at Maplewood Elementary or be transferred to a school closer to her foster placement. While Jessica and other school staff argued passionately for maintaining the stability and support that Sophia had found in her current educational environment, bureaucratic policies favored placement in schools within the foster family's district boundaries. The interstate implications of the Chen family's pattern of relocations created jurisdictional confusion that slowed the investigation and prosecution of David Chen's crimes. Different states had varying statutes of limitations, evidence requirements, and prosecution priorities that made it difficult to pursue comprehensive charges for the full scope of his criminal behavior. The lack of coordination between jurisdictions meant that important evidence and witness testimony from previous communities might be lost or deemed inadmissible in court proceedings. The system's focus on procedural compliance often seemed to take precedence over Sophia's immediate needs and best interests. Mandatory waiting periods, administrative reviews, and bureaucratic assessments consumed valuable time, while the traumatized child struggled to understand why the adults who claimed to want to help her were taking so long to provide the stability and security she desperately needed. Perhaps most frustrating of all was the revelation that many of the obstacles preventing effective intervention in Sophia's case were the same systemic problems that had allowed David Chen to evade accountability for years. The lack of communication between jurisdictions, the preference for family preservation over child protection, and the insufficient resources for investigating and prosecuting child abuse cases had all contributed to the pattern of abuse that Sophia had endured throughout her young life. Jessica's growing understanding of these systemic failures transformed her perspective from that of a concerned teacher to that of an advocate for comprehensive reform of child protection systems. She began to recognize that Sophia's case was not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of broader problems that affected countless vulnerable children who lacked effective protection from the very systems that were supposed to keep them safe. Part 9. The Choice Point. The moment of decision arrived on a gray Friday morning when Jessica received a phone call that would force her to choose between following official protocols and taking direct action to protect Sophia's best interests. The call came from Mrs. Catherine Brennan, the social worker assigned to Sophia's case, who informed Jessica that the child would be transferred to a different school the following Monday as part of her placement in a new foster home across town. The news hit Jessica like a physical blow, as she immediately understood the devastating impact that another major disruption would have on Sophia's fragile emotional state. The child had finally begun to show signs of healing and stability in the safe environment of Room 12 at Maplewood Elementary, where Jessica had worked tirelessly to create a therapeutic space that addressed her specific trauma-related needs. The prospect of severing this crucial connection seemed not only unnecessary, but potentially harmful to Sophia's long-term recovery. Mrs. Brennan's explanation for the transfer was bureaucratic and impersonal, focused on district boundaries, transportation logistics, and administrative convenience rather than the child's emotional well-being and therapeutic needs. When Jessica attempted to advocate for allowing Sophia to remain at Maplewood Elementary, she was told that exceptions to placement policies were rare and would require extensive documentation and approval processes that could take weeks or months to complete. The conversation revealed the fundamental disconnect between the system's procedural priorities and the reality of what traumatized children actually needed to heal and thrive. While officials focused on checking boxes and following established protocols, they seemed unable to recognize that their rigid adherence to rules was potentially undermining the very outcomes they claimed to want to achieve for children in their care. Jessica spent the weekend wrestling with the implications of Sophia's impending transfer and the limited options available to prevent it. The official channels for advocating on Sophia's behalf were slow, uncertain, and controlled by people who had never met the child and had no understanding of her specific needs and circumstances. The bureaucratic maze of forms, hearings, and reviews seemed designed more to protect agencies from liability than to serve the best interests of vulnerable children. The decision crystallized on Sunday evening when Jessica received an unexpected visit from Sophia herself, who had convinced her foster mother to drive her to Jessica's apartment complex. The child's desperation was palpable as she pleaded with Jessica not to let her be taken away from the only place where she felt safe and understood. Through tears, Sophia explained that she was terrified of having to start over again with new people who didn't know her story and might not believe or protect her. The conversation with Sophia lasted for over an hour, as the child poured out her fears about being transferred to another school where she would have to explain her situation to strangers and rebuild the trust and security that had taken months to establish at Maplewood Elementary. Her articulate expression of her needs and preferences challenged the system's assumption that adults always knew what was best for children without consulting the children themselves. Jessica's growing anger at the system's failures was matched by her deepening commitment to ensuring that Sophia's voice was heard and her needs were prioritized. The child had already endured years of powerlessness and victimization at the hands of adults who were supposed to protect her, and Jessica was determined not to become another adult who failed to advocate effectively for Sophia's welfare. The choice that Jessica faced was stark and consequential. She could continue working within the official channels, accepting the delays and compromises that characterized the bureaucratic approach to child welfare, or she could take more direct action that might violate protocols but would serve Sophia's immediate needs more effectively. The potential consequences of challenging the system included professional repercussions, legal complications, and the possibility of being excluded from future involvement in Sophia's case. Monday morning brought the arrival of Mrs. Brennan at Maplewood Elementary to facilitate Sophia's transfer to her new school. Jessica had spent the early morning hours preparing a comprehensive portfolio documenting Sophia's progress, therapeutic needs, and educational accommodations that would be crucial for her success in any new environment. More importantly, she had also prepared a detailed advocacy letter that challenged the wisdom of the transfer and requested reconsideration of the decision. The confrontation between Jessica and Mrs. Brennan took place in Principal Williams's office, with Dr. Foster also present to provide professional support for Jessica's position. The meeting began cordially, but quickly became tense as Jessica presented her evidence about the potential harm that the transfer would cause to Sophia's emotional and educational development. Mrs. Brennan's responses were defensive and procedural, focused on policy compliance rather than the merits of Jessica's concerns. The turning point came when Jessica made the decision to directly challenge the authority of the child welfare system to make unilateral decisions about Sophia's placement, without considering her voiced preferences and documented needs. She announced her intention to file formal complaints with multiple oversight agencies, contact media outlets about the case, and pursue legal advocacy for Sophia's right to educational stability and therapeutic continuity. The boldness of Jessica's challenge caught Mrs. Brennan off guard, as she was accustomed to dealing with compliant professionals who accepted bureaucratic decisions without significant resistance. The prospect of negative publicity and external scrutiny was clearly concerning to the social worker, who had not anticipated that a kindergarten teacher would be willing to risk her career to advocate for a single child's welfare. Principal. Williams and Dr. Foster rallied to support Jessica's position, adding their professional voices to the argument for allowing Sophia to remain at Maplewood Elementary. Their united front transformed what might have been dismissed as one teacher's emotional overreach into a coordinated professional advocacy effort that carried significantly more weight with the child welfare bureaucracy. The immediate result of Jessica's stand was a temporary delay in Sophia's transfer, while Mrs. Brennan consulted with her supervisors about how to respond to the unexpected resistance from the school. This delay provided crucial time for Jessica to mobilize additional support and resources for her advocacy effort, including legal counsel from a nonprofit organization that specialized in children's rights and educational advocacy. The choice that Jessica had made to directly challenge the system's authority marked a fundamental shift in her approach to protecting Sophia's interests. Rather than accepting the limitations and compromises that characterized bureaucratic decision-making, she had chosen to become a vocal and persistent advocate who was willing to risk professional consequences to ensure that Sophia's needs were prioritized over administrative convenience. The decision would have far-reaching implications not only for Sophia's immediate situation, but also for Jessica's understanding of her role and responsibilities as an educator and advocate for vulnerable children. She had crossed a line from which there would be no retreat, committing herself to a level of advocacy that would define her professional identity and personal mission for years to come. The showdown between Jessica and the child welfare bureaucracy reached its climax in the conference room of the Cedar Valley Municipal Building, where representatives from multiple agencies had gathered to address what had become known internally as the Maplewood situation. The room's sterile fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across the faces of social workers, administrators, and legal representatives who had assembled to deal with the unprecedented challenge to their authority that Jessica's advocacy had created. Mrs. Catherine Brennan sat at the head of the long conference table, flanked by her supervisor, Regional Director Patricia Hawkins, and the county's chief legal counsel, Attorney Robert Martinez. Their body language conveyed irritation and defensiveness as they prepared to reassert their institutional authority over what they clearly viewed as an insubordinate teacher who had overstepped her professional boundaries in a misguided attempt to interfere with established child welfare procedures. Jessica entered the room accompanied by Principal Williams, Dr. Foster, and Attorney Sophia Chen from the Children's Rights Legal Advocacy Center, a nonprofit organization that had agreed to represent Sophia's interests pro bono after reviewing the documentation that Jessica had compiled. The presence of legal counsel immediately elevated the stakes of the confrontation, transforming what might have been dismissed as an emotional outburst from a concerned teacher into a formal challenge to the system's decision-making authority. Attorney Chen began the proceedings by presenting a comprehensive legal brief that challenged the proposed transfer on multiple grounds, including violation of Sophia's due process rights, failure to consider her best interests as required by federal and state law, and inadequate consideration of expert recommendations regarding the therapeutic importance of educational stability for traumatized children. The brief cited numerous court precedents and statutory requirements that supported Sophia's right to remain in her current educational placement. The legal arguments were bolstered by detailed testimony from Dr. Foster regarding the specific therapeutic progress that Sophia had made at Maplewood Elementary and the potential psychological harm that would result from another major disruption in her environment. Dr. Foster's 15 years of experience working with traumatized children gave her testimony significant weight, particularly when she explained the clinical research demonstrating the importance of stable relationships and familiar environments for children recovering from complex trauma. Jessica's own testimony was perhaps the most powerful element of the presentation, as she provided a detailed account of her relationship with Sophia and the specific interventions and accommodations that had been crucial to the child's progress. Her intimate knowledge of Sophia's daily needs, triggers, and coping mechanisms highlighted the irreplaceable value of the therapeutic relationship that had developed between teacher and student over the course of several months. The presentation included video recordings of Sophia's own statements about her preferences and needs, which had been captured during therapeutic sessions with Dr. Foster. The child's articulate expression of her desire to remain at Maplewood Elementary and her fear of being transferred to an unfamiliar environment provided compelling evidence that the proposed move was contrary to her expressed wishes and psychological well-being. Regional Director Hawkins responded to the presentation with barely concealed anger, characterizing Jessica's advocacy as an inappropriate attempt to undermine the professional judgment of trained social workers and administrators who had years of experience making placement decisions for children in care. She argued that allowing individual teachers to challenge placement decisions would create chaos in the child welfare system and undermine the authority that caseworkers needed to make difficult decisions in the best interests of children. The confrontation intensified when Attorney Chen directly challenged the qualifications and decision-making process that had led to the transfer decision, pointing out that none of the officials involved in the decision had actually met Sophia or observed her in her current educational environment. The attorney argued that making placement decisions based solely on administrative convenience and bureaucratic policies, without considering the specific needs and circumstances of individual children, violated both professional standards and legal requirements. Mrs. Brennan attempted to defend the transfer decision by citing transportation logistics, district boundary policies, and the need to place Sophia in a school closer to her foster home. However, under questioning from Attorney Chen, she was forced to admit that no assessment had been conducted to evaluate the potential impact of the transfer on Sophia's emotional well-being or educational progress, and that no alternative arrangements had been considered to address the logistical concerns while maintaining educational stability. The most damaging revelation came when Attorney Chen presented evidence that the Child Welfare Agency had a pattern of making placement decisions based on administrative convenience rather than children's best interests, with multiple documented cases where similar transfers had resulted in educational regression and psychological deterioration for traumatized children. This evidence suggested that Sophia's case was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a systemic problem that prioritized bureaucratic efficiency over child welfare. The confrontation reached its peak when Jessica directly addressed Regional Director Hawkins, challenging her to explain how traumatizing a child who had already endured years of abuse could possibly be considered to be in that child's best interest. Jessica's passionate but controlled presentation of Sophia's history and current needs forced the officials to confront the human impact of their administrative decisions in a way that they had apparently not previously considered. The turning point came when Principal Williams presented a detailed proposal for addressing the logistical concerns that had motivated the transfer decision while allowing Sophia to remain at Maplewood Elementary. The proposal included arrangements for specialized transportation, modified scheduling to accommodate therapeutic appointments, and enhanced coordination between the school and Sophia's foster family to ensure that her needs were being met comprehensively. Attorney Chen supported the principal's proposal with legal arguments, demonstrating that federal disability rights laws required agencies to make reasonable accommodations to ensure that children with trauma-related disabilities could access appropriate educational services in the least restrictive environment. The attorney argued that transferring Sophia to a different school, without first attempting to address logistical concerns through accommodation, violated her rights under multiple federal statutes. The pressure from multiple directions began to take its toll on the child welfare officials, who found themselves defending policies and decisions that appeared increasingly arbitrary and harmful when subjected to detailed scrutiny. Regional Director Hawkins requested a recess to consult with higher-level administrators and legal counsel, about how to respond to the unexpected legal and professional challenges that had been raised. During the recess, Attorney Chen privately informed Jessica that the confrontation had already achieved significant success, regardless of the final outcome, because it had forced the child welfare system to justify its decisions in ways that would establish important precedents for future cases. The attorney explained that even if Sophia's transfer was ultimately upheld, the legal challenges that had been raised would make similar arbitrary decisions more difficult to defend in the future. When the meeting resumed, Regional Director Hawkins announced that the agency would postpone Sophia's transfer pending a comprehensive review of her case and the development of a more detailed plan that would address both her therapeutic needs and the administrative requirements of the child welfare system. While this outcome fell short of the permanent resolution that Jessica had hoped for, it represented a significant victory that would provide time for additional advocacy and legal action. The confrontation concluded with an agreement to establish a multidisciplinary team that would include Jessica, Dr. Foster, Sophia's foster parents, her therapist, and representatives from the Child Welfare Agency to develop a comprehensive plan for her ongoing care and education. This collaborative approach represented a fundamental shift from the top-down decision-making that had characterized the agency's previous handling of the case. Jessica left the meeting with a mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism, knowing that she had fundamentally changed the trajectory of Sophia's case, while also establishing important precedents that would benefit other vulnerable children in the future. The confrontation had required her to risk her professional reputation and challenge powerful institutions, but the potential impact on Sophia's life and the lives of other children made those risks worthwhile. Part 11. The breakthrough. The resolution of Sophia's placement crisis came through an unexpected alliance between Jessica and Lisa Chen, Sophia's mother, who had been quietly working toward recovery and reunification while the bureaucratic battles raged around her daughter's educational future. Lisa's transformation from a terrified victim of domestic violence into a determined advocate for her child's welfare provided the breakthrough that finally convinced child welfare officials to prioritize Sophia's therapeutic needs over administrative convenience. Lisa's journey toward healing had begun during her hospitalization following David Chen's arrest, when victim advocates had connected her with specialized counseling services for survivors of intimate partner violence. The therapeutic work had helped her understand that her own victimization had compromised her ability to protect Sophia, but it had also empowered her to begin taking active steps to create a safe and stable environment for her daughter's recovery. The turning point in Lisa's advocacy came when she requested a meeting with Jessica to better understand Sophia's needs and the therapeutic progress that had been made at Maplewood Elementary. The conversation between the two women was emotionally charged but ultimately healing, as Lisa expressed her gratitude for Jessica's intervention and her regret that she had been unable to protect Sophia from years of escalating abuse. Jessica's detailed explanation of Sophia's daily routine, therapeutic accommodations, and emotional needs helped Lisa understand why maintaining educational stability was so crucial for her daughter's continued healing. The teacher's passionate advocacy and intimate knowledge of Sophia's progress convinced Lisa that fighting for her daughter's right to remain at Maplewood Elementary was one of the most important things she could do as a recovering parent working toward reunification. Lisa's decision to formally petition the family court for Sophia's right to educational stability added significant weight to the advocacy efforts that Jessica had initiated. As Sophia's mother and legal guardian, Lisa had standing to challenge placement decisions in ways that Jessica, as a teacher, could not. Her petition, supported by detailed documentation from Jessica and Dr. Foster, requested that the court order the Child Welfare Agency to prioritize Sophia's therapeutic needs when making placement decisions. The legal petition also included Lisa's request for expedited reunification proceedings based on her completion of domestic violence counseling, her acquisition of stable housing and employment, and her demonstrated commitment to providing a safe environment for Sophia's recovery. The combination of educational advocacy and reunification planning created a comprehensive approach that addressed both Sophia's immediate needs and her long-term stability. The family court judge assigned to the case, the Honorable Margaret Sullivan, had extensive experience with child welfare cases and a reputation for prioritizing children's best interests over bureaucratic convenience. Judge Sullivan's review of the evidence presented by Jessica, Dr. Foster, and Sophia Chen led to a scathing critique of the Child Welfare Agency's decision-making process and a court order requiring them to develop a placement plan that prioritized Sophia's therapeutic and educational needs. The court order specifically required the Child Welfare Agency to provide clear and convincing evidence that any proposed placement changes would serve Sophia's best interests, rather than simply administrative convenience. Judge Sullivan also ordered the appointment of a guardian ad litem to represent Sophia's interests independently and ensure that her voice was heard in all future proceedings related to her placement and care. The breakthrough extended beyond Sophia's individual case when Attorney Chen used the court's ruling as the foundation for a broader legal challenge to the Child Welfare Agency's placement policies. The attorney filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of all children in the agency's care who had been subjected to arbitrary placement changes that prioritized administrative convenience over therapeutic and educational stability. The class action lawsuit attracted significant media attention and public support, particularly from educators and child advocates who had witnessed similar cases where bureaucratic policies had undermined the welfare of vulnerable children. The publicity generated additional pressure on the Child Welfare Agency to reform its policies and decision-making processes to better serve the needs of traumatized children. Jessica's role in the breakthrough was formally recognized when Judge Sullivan appointed her as a special advocate for Sophia's educational needs, giving her official standing to participate in all placement decisions and ensuring that her expertise and knowledge of Sophia's therapeutic requirements would be considered in future planning. This appointment represented an unprecedented recognition of the crucial role that educators could play in advocating for the welfare of vulnerable children. The successful advocacy effort also led to significant changes in the policies and procedures of the Child Welfare Agency, including new requirements for therapeutic assessments before placement changes, mandatory consideration of educational stability in placement planning, and enhanced training for caseworkers on the importance of maintaining therapeutic relationships for traumatized children. The breakthrough culminated in a comprehensive reunification plan that would allow Sophia to return to her mother's care while maintaining her enrollment at Maplewood Elementary and continuing her therapeutic work with Dr. Foster. The plan included extensive support services for both mother and daughter, including ongoing counseling, family therapy, and regular monitoring to ensure that the home environment remained safe and supportive. Lisa's completion of her recovery program and her successful advocacy for Sophia's educational needs demonstrated her transformation from a victim who had been unable to protect her child into a strong and capable parent who was prepared to prioritize her daughter's welfare above all other considerations. This transformation was crucial in convincing child welfare officials and the family court that reunification was appropriate and in Sophia's best interests. The reunification process was carefully structured to ensure Sophia's continued progress and emotional stability, with graduated increases in the amount of time she spent with her mother and regular assessments of the family's functioning. Jessica and Dr. Foster remained actively involved in monitoring Sophia's adjustment and providing support as needed throughout the transition period. The successful resolution of Sophia's case represented a victory not only for the specific child and family involved, but also for the principle that traumatized children's therapeutic and educational needs should take precedence over bureaucratic convenience in placement decisions. The legal precedents established through the advocacy effort would benefit countless other children in similar situations for years to come. Part 12. The Transformation. The months following Sophia's reunification with her mother marked a period of remarkable healing and growth that validated every aspect of the advocacy effort that Jessica had led to protect the child's welfare. The transformation was evident not only in Sophia's improved emotional state and academic performance, but also in the fundamental changes that had occurred within the child welfare system as a result of the legal challenges and policy reforms that the case had generated. Sophia's return to her mother's care was managed through a careful transition process that prioritized her emotional security and educational stability above all other considerations. The family's new apartment was located within the Maplewood Elementary School district, ensuring that Sophia could continue her relationship with Jessica and maintain the therapeutic environment that had been so crucial to her initial recovery from trauma. The physical transformation in Sophia was striking and immediate. The hypervigilance, defensive posturing, and fearful expressions that had characterized her behavior during the worst periods of her abuse gave way to the natural curiosity, playfulness, and social engagement that were appropriate for a child her age. Her artwork evolved from the dark, violent imagery that had first alerted Jessica to her situation, to bright, hopeful pictures filled with rainbows, flowers, and smiling families. Jessica documented Sophia's academic progress with the same meticulous attention to detail that she had applied to recording evidence of the child's trauma and abuse. Sophia's reading level improved dramatically as her anxiety decreased and her ability to concentrate increased. Mathematical concepts that had been impossible for her to grasp during periods of high stress became manageable and even enjoyable, as her sense of safety and security grew. The therapeutic work that Sophia continued with Dr. Foster focused on helping her develop healthy coping mechanisms and emotional regulation skills that would serve her throughout her life. The child's remarkable resilience and capacity for healing served as an inspiration to everyone involved in her care, demonstrating the incredible potential for recovery that existed when traumatized children received appropriate support and protection. Lisa Chen's transformation was equally remarkable and crucial to the family's long-term success. Her completion of domestic violence counseling had provided her with the tools and confidence needed to recognize and respond to potential threats to her family's safety. Her newfound ability to advocate effectively for Sophia's needs represented a fundamental shift from the powerless victim she had been during her marriage to David Chen. The relationship between Lisa and Jessica evolved into a collaborative partnership focused on supporting Sophia's continued growth and development. Lisa's deep appreciation for Jessica's advocacy created a foundation for ongoing communication and coordination that ensured Sophia's needs were being met comprehensively, both at home and at school. The legal consequences for David Chen provided additional security for Sophia and her mother's new life together. His conviction on multiple counts of child abuse and domestic violence resulted in a lengthy prison sentence that would keep him away from his family for many years. The interstate coordination that Attorney Chen had facilitated also led to additional charges in other jurisdictions where the family had previously lived, ensuring that David Chen would face consequences for the full scope of his criminal behavior. The systemic changes that resulted from Sophia's case had far-reaching implications for child welfare practices throughout the region and beyond. The class action lawsuit that Attorney Chen had filed led to a comprehensive settlement agreement that required the Child Welfare Agency to implement new policies prioritizing educational stability and therapeutic continuity for traumatized children in their care. The settlement also established a new position within the agency specifically dedicated to advocating for children's educational rights and ensuring that placement decisions considered the importance of maintaining therapeutic relationships and familiar environments. This position was designed to bridge the gap between child welfare and educational systems that had previously operated with little coordination or communication. Training programs for social workers and other child welfare professionals were enhanced to include modules on educational advocacy, trauma-informed care, and the importance of maintaining stability for children recovering from abuse and neglect. These training improvements were designed to prevent future cases where children's therapeutic and educational needs were overlooked in favor of administrative convenience. Jessica's role in the transformation extended beyond her continued work, with Sophia to include advocacy and training activities that would benefit other vulnerable children throughout the region. She became a sought-after speaker at conferences and professional development events, sharing her experiences and expertise with educators, social workers, and child advocates who were working to improve outcomes for traumatized children. The recognition that Jessica received for her advocacy work included several professional awards and honors, but more importantly, it led to her appointment to a state-level task force on educational rights for children in foster care. This position allowed her to influence policy development and implementation on a much broader scale, ensuring that Sophia's case would have lasting impact on child welfare practices throughout the state. The transformation of Maplewood Elementary itself was another significant outcome of Sophia's case. The school implemented new policies and procedures for identifying and responding to signs of child abuse and neglect, and all staff members received enhanced training in trauma-informed educational practices. The school also established a formal partnership with local child welfare agencies to improve communication and coordination when students were involved in protective services cases. Dr. Foster's work with Sophia also contributed to important advances in therapeutic approaches for young children who had experienced complex trauma. The detailed documentation of Sophia's progress and the specific interventions that had been most effective provided valuable data for research and program development that would benefit other traumatized children in the future. The transformation was perhaps most evident in Sophia's own growing confidence and sense of agency. The child who had once been silent and withdrawn began to speak up for herself and others, demonstrating the leadership qualities and empathy that often emerged in survivors who had received appropriate support and healing. Her artwork began to include images of herself as a helper and protector, suggesting that she was developing a positive sense of identity and purpose despite her traumatic experiences. The success of Sophia's case became a model for other communities and agencies seeking to improve their responses to child abuse and neglect. The collaborative approach that had developed between educators, child welfare professionals, legal, advocates, and family members demonstrated the power of coordinated intervention that prioritized children's needs over institutional convenience and bureaucratic policies. The long-term stability that Sophia achieved with her mother provided a foundation for continued growth and development that would serve her throughout her life. The trauma she had experienced would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her possibilities or limited her potential for happiness and success. Part 13. The Wisdom. The wisdom that emerged from Sophia's case extended far beyond the individual success story of one child's rescue and recovery to encompass broader lessons about the power of individual advocacy, the importance of trauma-informed approaches to child welfare, and the critical role that educators could play in protecting vulnerable children. Jessica's transformation from a concerned teacher into a passionate advocate for systemic reform provided a model for how individual professionals could create lasting change that would benefit countless children for generations to come. The most fundamental lesson that emerged from the case was the crucial importance of listening to children and believing their attempts to communicate about their experiences, even when those communications came through nonverbal means such as artwork, behavior changes, or physical symptoms. Sophia's drawings had been her way of crying for help when she lacked the words or courage to speak directly about her abuse, and Jessica's willingness to take those artistic expressions seriously had literally saved the child's life. The case also demonstrated the critical need for educators to receive comprehensive training in recognizing signs of trauma and abuse, understanding the impact of adverse childhood experiences on learning and development, and knowing how to respond effectively when concerns arose. Jessica's background in child psychology and art therapy had been crucial to her ability to recognize the significance of Sophia's artwork, but many educators lacked similar training and might miss important warning signs as a result. The systemic, Changes that resulted from the advocacy effort highlighted the importance of coordination and communication between different agencies and professionals involved in child welfare cases. The traditional silos that had separated educational, social service, legal, and therapeutic systems had created gaps and inefficiencies that allowed vulnerable children to fall through the cracks or receive inadequate protection and support. The legal precedents established through Attorney Chen's advocacy work created important protections for children's educational rights and established principles that would guide future placement decisions and policy development. The requirement that child welfare agencies demonstrate clear benefits rather than simply administrative convenience when making placement changes represented a fundamental shift toward prioritizing children's needs over bureaucratic efficiency. The transformation of Lisa Chen from victim to advocate provided powerful evidence of the potential for healing and empowerment that existed when domestic violence survivors received appropriate support and resources. Her successful advocacy for Sophia's educational needs demonstrated that parents could become powerful allies in protecting their children's welfare when they were given the tools and confidence needed to challenge systems and fight for their children's rights. The case also illustrated the importance of persistence and courage in advocacy efforts, as the initial bureaucratic resistance to Jessica's concerns could easily have discouraged less determined advocates from continuing their efforts. The willingness to risk professional consequences and challenge powerful institutions was often necessary to achieve meaningful change for vulnerable children. But the potential impact of such advocacy made those risks worthwhile. The broader implications of Sophia's case extended to policy development and implementation at state and national levels, as the innovative approaches and successful outcomes generated interest from researchers, policymakers, and advocates throughout the country. The model of collaborative advocacy that had emerged from the case was studied and replicated in other communities seeking to improve their responses to child abuse and neglect. The wisdom gained from the case also emphasized the critical importance of trauma-informed approaches in all systems that serve children, including schools, child welfare agencies, courts, and therapeutic services. Understanding the impact of trauma on children's behavior, learning, and development was essential for providing appropriate support and avoiding interventions that might inadvertently re-traumatize vulnerable children. Jessica's ongoing work as an advocate and trainer allowed her to share the lessons learned from Sophia's case with thousands of other professionals who worked with vulnerable children. Her presentations and training programs emphasized the practical strategies and approaches that had been most effective in supporting Sophia's recovery, providing concrete tools that other educators and advocates could use in their own work. The long-term follow-up on Sophia's progress provided important data about the effectiveness of trauma-informed educational approaches and the importance of maintaining therapeutic relationships and educational stability for children recovering from abuse. The child's continued success in school and her healthy emotional development validated the advocacy efforts that had been made on her behalf. The case also highlighted the crucial role that communities could play in protecting vulnerable children, as the support and resources that had been mobilized on Sophia's behalf demonstrated the power of collective action and shared responsibility for child welfare. The involvement of multiple individuals and organizations in advocating for Sophia's needs created a safety net that ensured she received comprehensive support throughout her recovery process. The wisdom that emerged from the case was perhaps best embodied in Sophia herself, who had transformed from a traumatized and silent victim into a confident and articulate child who understood her own worth and had learned to advocate for her own needs. Her resilience and capacity for healing served as an inspiration to everyone who had been involved in her care and demonstrated the incredible potential that existed in every child when they received appropriate protection and support. The final lesson from Sophia's case was the understanding that child protection was not simply the responsibility of designated professionals and agencies, but rather a shared obligation that required vigilance, courage, and commitment from everyone who encountered children in their daily lives. Teachers, neighbors, community members, and other caring adults all had roles to play in creating safe environments where children could thrive and reach their full potential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.